Okay, this is OK here, and we're going to do a match review of a match that took place a few weeks ago between littleplotkin, a FIDE master from Canada, and mastertan, a Crazyhouse specialist. And just to show the cross table of the Crazyhouse World Championship, we see here littleplotkin and mastertan. Well, that's kind of a bit of a spoiler. Littleplotkin ended up 5th, and mastertan ended up 8th. But the winner of the candidates was actually Opperwesen with 9.5 points out of 10, which is why Opperwesen is now facing the 2017, so yeah, still the current Crazyhouse World Champion, Jan Lee. And that's going to be decided this Saturday at 1800 GMT. Opperwesen against Jan Lee. The first 2 days, Opperwesen lost 9-11 and won 12-8. So the score stands at 21 to Opperwesen against 19 to Jan Lee. So just a two-game advantage with 20 games to play. So it's the first to 30 wins. But in this stream, I just want to look back at some of the games that weren't live streamed in the candidates phase. And I think they're interesting, worth looking at. And the match I want to look at today is between, as I said, littleplotkin, whose perspective I'm taking for this video, and mastertan. Okay, so in game 1, littleplotkin was black. And we see 4 knights, but with bishop e7. So d4 is usual here for white, but white chose to castle straight away, and black castled also. Gosh, my voice. Okay, so a4. Now, maybe that was a little bit of a loss of tempo. I'm going to leave the engine on. That allows viewers to get some kind of idea. Yeah, a4 is maybe a little bit of a loss of tempo for white. In Crazyhouse, you have to attack on the king side. So what's the purpose of a4? It might be to give the bishop a square back on a2, so in order to maintain the bishop on this diagonal on the black king. So a3 is sometimes an idea apparently, but a4, okay. So it's not. Maybe it's a slightly dubious move. d6. Okay, just developing. And this is quite an annoying pin because now this bishop can't come back to defend. So black is looking pretty good here. Queen to d7, again, another slightly strange looking move, but it has a point, and I guess it's looking at this h3 square, which is a potential weakness and a sort of entry point into black's position. Knight d5, takes. So king comes out of the way of that pin. Okay, and here, well, Stockfish quite likes just taking this knight and dropping a knight on h4, and I guess the attraction is maybe g2 becomes a weakness. I'm not sure. So if the queen just drops back to e2, yeah. So we see now the point of this queen. I had not seen this at all before I just started this stream, but and I am using the benefit of the engine. Queen takes h3, and so that I hadn't seen that idea coming to the fore so powerfully. And of course you're threatening queen takes g2, but the point is, actually this is mate, because of knight here check, and if you just move the king, pawn here is checkmate. So the knight covers the 2 dark squares, and if you take the knight, well then you're winning the queen with check, so that's also going to be mate. You could try and get out of the way, but we can just drop a pawn here, putting the king on a square where we can check it again with the knight, and the king is just trapped inside this little box, and the queen on g2 is going to be mating it. So queen takes h3. Wow, yeah, I had not seen that. So bishop takes knight was a really nice idea. Littleplotkin missed in this position. Yeah, that's really something. So probably, and then taking back with the pawn isn't really an option, because then the queen comes and takes h3 directly, with threats of if you say did something like drop a pawn at bishop at g2. Well, okay, so it's nothing completely immediate, but yeah. So I can't see so I can't see anything completely immediate, but it's looking very precarious. The black king is perfectly safe. White could be dropping, for example, a pawn on f4 at some. Black could be dropping a pawn on f4 at some point, or could be trying to maybe do something on dropping a pawn on h2. But I'm trying to work out that might just defend black. So, okay, this is deviating from the game, but maybe it is quite instructive. How do you continue? Like, if white did nothing, what is black's threat? Okay, so this is interesting. There is actually a mate. Knight at h3. So if I just took it, then queen takes h3. So what I'm still not seeing the threat. I see. Just okay. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. And if I just did something like this, okay, he's got a bishop in hand. Okay, now that one I can see. King h1, bishop takes g3 with check, and queen h2 is checkmate. So that is a problem. Okay, so knight at h3, I see, and if you move it out of the way, we're going knight takes pawn with check. Okay, so this is a very nice idea. Bishop takes knight, queen takes, and queen takes knight here, and then queen takes pawn. And even if it's not directly mate, you have a huge attack. Apparently that's the best move from white. And you have just giving some lateral defense on g2. But you have a huge attack on the white king. Like knight at d4 follows and so on. With pressure on f3 and yeah. Okay, so backtracking. But instead what happened in the game was the bishop backed off to g6. So we have again back to a very peaceful position. Rook to g8, g5, knight to d8. So black did was putting all his pieces on his king side. So Littleplotkin really just trying to defend his king, but black's position is a little bit passive. Mastertan just picks up a pawn, knight to e8. Is that right? Yep, apparently that's what happened. Something not worth saying is obviously in normal chess you would try and do a move like b6 to trap the bishop. This doesn't really work in Crazyhouse because that pawn, well, it does trap the bishop, but white doesn't need that bishop to continue his attack. He doesn't suffer so much from that piece being out of the attack. Let's put it that way. So he takes the pawn, so knight e8. So this is hitting the knight on g5. Knight takes f7. Remember, it's defended by this bishop on this long diagonal. Eek. Let's get this right. Takes. Okay, so he defends his bishop. So it seems like black is holding on, just trying to, but the problem is his position is a little bit passive, and so it's instructive to see how does Mastertan break black down in this position. And it's just hitting on weak squares, and he'll just keep on hitting on, so tries to blockade, but takes, he'll just keep on hitting on both light squares and dark squares. and yeah, he's finally getting in on the 7th rank, just getting in on f7 basically. So he takes a bishop here because he wants to drop a bishop on g6 on this square. That's what he does. Then that wins the queen. When the queen comes in, queen invades, and he's still got another queen in hand. Discovered check, and queen swings in for checkmate. So, first game was a win for mastertan, but my gosh, there was an idea I hadn't even noticed when I first looked at this game, how powerful bishop takes f3 was. That is a nice idea. Wow. Yeah, and so probably in this position, the best move for white apparently is actually just defending the queen with the bishop. Bishop at d1, bishop anywhere along on any of these squares, just giving up the queen. And the best move for white, for black, might even be knight at f4, hitting. These two are not even taking the queen, but taking the queen is certainly good for black. Or it's suggesting knight at f4, bishop takes knight, then take the queen, then bishop takes, and then pawn takes bishop. And I guess the point of that is that comes with a certain tempo. If you just takes, well, you could change the move order, but maybe, yeah. So there's probably a very subtle point here, but I'm not seeing it. So if we took straight away, maybe that knight would be useful for defense. If we did this, and then knight here, apparently that's slightly less strong. So that's like a slight puzzle for you. Why would that be slightly less strong? Because it's slightly beyond me to see why. With knight at f5 being, something like knight at f5 being, yeah, I see, because a knight can be used as a defensive piece, but yeah, I see. So the point is bishop takes f4 is still a possibility, but there are other possibilities now black has. He can use that knight, which you've just used to capture the queen, as a defensive piece and drop it on either of these two squares. Okay, so that was game one of the candidates match between mastertan and littleplotkin. We're looking from the perspective of littleplotkin. Quite interesting first game, and mastertan took it. Now let's look at game two. So game two, littleplotkin is white, goes with e4, and mastertan going with a rather interesting a6 b5 setup. The point of this setup is white does have to watch out for this light squared bishop, which does stare straight into white's king side. It's important to build this. White is black, so controls the flank, but it's important white has a strong center, and black is now going to attack that center from the flank. So we see the knight and the bishop, and if white ever develops his knight to here, the pawn might push this knight away. So it's using the flanks to attack the center. So you build a strong center, takes, g5, hitting the queen, and this was a critical point in the match actually. Sorry, in the game. Because the move played was knight e4, and that gives away, and littleplotkin executed perfectly at this point. Knight takes f7, takes the knight, and then he's going to use the knight to attack. In fact, he goes desperado with the bishop first, and then he's going to use the knight to attack. Okay, so a huge attack ensues. This is a really critical point, because the move black needed to play in this position, and this kind of ties up with this diagonal, was at e4. So you're willing to give away the knight, but that way you take the knight here, and but the bishop, together with this pawn on this diagonal, is a sufficiently grave threat that you can't just ignore it, and taking with the pawn is not a very good idea. There are more particular reasons why it's not a good idea. Queen takes g5, bishop takes g5, and I was thinking knight at h3 to pick up the bishop, but there is something else. So queen takes g5, bishop takes queen. I was thinking knight at h3 is good. Check, picking up the bishop. But there's something else in mind with Stockfish. Knight takes e5, just staring that, threatening this pawn. If you have to take this knight, or knight takes f3 is coming. And now knight takes h3. Okay, king h1, and the idea of that is then you've got a pawn in hand to just dislocate that king just a little bit before you take this bishop. And this is powerful because the threat is knight here, check. If the king goes back, we have knight here, check, king going to the corner, and bishop at g2, checkmate. So knight here, check, you'd have to step the king up. And I can't see... So if white does nothing, I was just trying to see what the mate was. So is there anything starting with knight at h4? Apparently not. But, okay, so if white just defends f3, is there any mate starting with knight at h4? Yeah, so there's bishop takes, e2, okay. Let's see. So apparently knight at h4 is not the starting point of the mate, but rather knight at f4. And I guess the point of knight at f4 is then when the king steps up, you can swing back. So if your king goes here, knight goes here, and pawn here. But knight at f4 is good because if the king steps up, we've now got knight h5 check. And these two knights control all these squares, so the king has to step up again. But there's only one square it can step up to, which is king g4. Now, as we said, if it steps down to g2, it will indeed be getting mated because of bishop at h3. If king goes here, you're dropping a pawn. If king goes here, you're taking knight takes pawn. So certainly we know on this move we have to step up. And now we have knight takes f3. The knight takes f3 will cover these two squares. That's covered. This is covered. So we've got two choices. We can either go to here or take the knight. If we take the knight, then yeah, g6 is checkmate. So we have to step back. And now we're just going to gradually push the king back, and I think we've just got enough diagonal pieces to push the king into the corner. So that's just exactly enough. So that's why bishop takes f3 was the idea in that situation. Okay, so that's all various reasons why pawn takes knight. Pawn takes knight is really not an option. It opens up the king far too much. So in this situation you go knight takes, and it's not that white is doing badly here, but white has lost his direct attack. But black does have a very nice move here, knight at h4. And if you do the very natural thing of takes, and replace the knight on f3, attacking the queen, there's a really nice idea of knight takes d4. So you might think, well, why not just you could take the queen, you could take the knight. The point is, if you took the knight, it is actually very dangerous because of knight at h3 check. And if you're swinging, if you just ignore that knight, yeah, that is really a bad idea because knight takes pawn check, takes, and now we've got queen takes g2 mate threat, rook at g1 mate threat. And it's impossible to stop both. So that would really be a bad idea. And you can't just ignore that knight by just sidestepping, because otherwise, well, the queen can just pick up another knight, and that queen can't just be taken because takes, and we have a very beautiful mate with the bishop controlling the diagonal and the knight controlling the two dark squares. So in this position, yeah, so sidestepping doesn't really work because of this, because knight takes f2 is too great a threat. So you'd have to take that knight, but then you still got this lovely idea of queen takes knight. Okay, you could take the queen, but now we can take the queen with check, come in, and it's not mating, but you have a really big attack. If white were to take that knight, then there would be mate coming. So just backtracking a few moves. So you have this knight. So taking the knight is not an option. Taking the queen, on the other hand, okay, so it is an option, but you're losing a queen as well. So knight at e2, and I guess this is the point. Knight at e2 takes, taking the queen. White could try to do moves like this, but I'm just going through some. So the threat from black is bishop takes g2, knight takes, and starting a huge attack on the white king. If white goes for some kind of counterattack, okay, you've got to be careful. If you move the king, queen at e8 is checkmate. If you takes, g2 is to stop a very nice mate threat. Knight at g7. This is a very nice mate threat, because if bishop takes g7, queen at e7 is mate. And if you sidestep, queen at e8 is mate. So you can't ignore it. So you have to do a move like this. And if white does this, okay, then black can just cast the other side of the board. And here, actually, black has to defend against a mate threat on b8, and queen at a8 is fine. And also threatened b2. So white probably does defending and attack at the same time by swapping off queens. And white could do something like this. Okay, but now black's attack is starting, and this is actually going to be quite good for black. So it's only -4 or so. Notice queen takes bishop is not a possibility, because otherwise the bishop and the pawn are going to be enough to break through and deliver mate. So just to show that, queen takes bishop, we could just go pawn takes pawn. If knight takes pawn, obviously we have to take it, otherwise queen at h1 is checkmate. If knight takes pawn, bishop takes knight, king takes. Actually, we don't even need the knights. We could just go, yeah, pawn at f3. And we're threatening mate on g2, so we have to take it. Now queen here, king g3, and I was going to go knight here, but there's actually something much faster, which is queen g4, checkmate. So backtracking, there's this very nice idea, is the point of pawn at e4, and I've done some sort of detailed analysis on that, but that wasn't played in the game, and knight e4 was played instead, and this proved to be a mistake. And this is really a wonderful play from littleplotkin now. He goes knight takes f7. So he doesn't take the knight first and then go knight takes f7. And I think the move order is important. So if you just took the knight first, takes the bishop, and then knight takes f7. Yeah, this pawn could apparently even take on f3. You could take. That's quite surprising. Yeah, e takes f3, and if the knight were to take the queen, then you can go knight takes. Now this bishop is supporting this pawn, and black probably has mate threats of his own coming shortly. Even though you lose the queen, you've won 2 pieces for the queen. So really nice to get this move order accurate. Knight takes f7 first, and then taking the knight. So if you take the bishop back now, there's no e takes f3 check, because knight at g5 is coming immediately. And in fact, this is just mating. Takes, king takes is forced, comes out with the bishop. If you try and block, I think queen here is mating anyway. Is that right? No, so what if you try and block with, say, a bishop or something? Yeah, so it's bishop takes, and knight takes, and now this file is open, so queen c5 is checkmate. So that's the problem. So just to recap, pawn there, takes, bishop here, you have to step back, pawn here, have to step forwards. Knight takes pawn. You win a free the knight, and the knights are going to be mating. So it is a forced mate, but the point is that white is completely safe. Okay, so what happened next? Bishop takes knight. So that's why black couldn't take this bishop. The mating attack is too strong with knight at g5. So mastertan defended the mate with bishop to e7. Takes, takes, takes. And here it'd be very natural to go knight to g5, for example, and apparently that is a decent move. But a very nice move, maybe even nicer move, played by littleplotkin. E6 first. So if that pawn is taken, you go knight to g5, and then you're winning the pawn back. So you're getting an extra. You're getting your pawn back anyway, but you're just further. Yeah, let me think. If that pawn is taken, you're taking it back. But what was the advantage? I see, you're taking away the defense of the e6 square. So e6 is defended at the moment. So by pushing e6, it means that if that e6 pawn is taken, you then have control of that e6 square. So knight g5 is now, yeah, Stockfish can see the mate even. So the point is, if he steps back, you have knight takes pawn. If he steps to either of these two squares, you can drop a pawn, bring him back, use another knight here, and then control this f7 square and drop a pawn on f7. So he steps back immediately, and then littleplotkin again plays a very nice move. Queen takes h7, recognizing that controlling the light squares, if rook takes queen, it's mate, because knight g6 controls the two dark squares, king has to go to one of the light squares, and pawn at f7 is mate. So if you take away the knight, okay, he takes away the rook, check, and now black is getting mated. Pawn here, checkmate. Queen controlling the back rank. So really nice game from littleplotkin, and that tied up that's the candidates match 1 game all. So just checking, yes. So I am on the Lichess front page. Okay, so now game 3. This is a 10-game candidates match, so it's 1 game all. So let's see how this one went. So mastertan going for a b3 e3 setup, and then bishop d3. So something quite creative, with also now with an h4 push. So this is quite a nice move to stop the h-pawn running any further. Bishop takes h7. So this is certainly very attacking stuff from mastertan. He's won a pawn, and so he's threatening pawn at c7. So littleplotkin just moves the knight out of the way. The h-pawn continues to be pushed. The knight is no longer guarding this square. Got to be a little worried also about this diagonal coming to life in future. Takes, takes. Yeah. So littleplotkin is putting a lot of pressure on this f3 square. Yeah, and this is maybe a point where he should have gone f6 just to increase that pressure on f3. But he went to e6, which is maybe slightly weaker. So the pressure is dissolved a little now. And the queen is hit. Okay, this check is blocked, takes, takes. And here again, Mr. littleplotkin has a really nice idea. Bishop at d4, so he's trying to work on these dark squares, trying to hit this bishop. And the point is this bishop can't be taken, or you take back with check, and then you take this bishop. So he's really exploiting the fact that the king is in the center, and sort of threatening to open up this center. So maybe that was the one advantage of being on e6 rather than f6. So it's double-edged. But here there was a slight error. With this move, knight at e4, So much better was just exchanging off the bishops and putting the bishop back on f4. Because what's really surprising is this queen is actually trapped. So the knight guards this square, the bishop guards this square, the knight guards this square, queen guards this square. There's actually only one square it can go to, which is here. But then you can do this, check, takes, takes, and you're picking up the queen, and also white's position is extremely fragile. So that was winning, in fact, for black. But with this move, littleplotkin gave away a lot of material, and mastertan found a very nice, not only giving away one material, but his queen's under attack, but actually he found a way of picking up this knight, and so completely turning around the initiative from black side to white side. So if that isn't taken, the bishop is just going to take this knight. So he takes it, but now this. Now he would love to be able to take it, but the problem is pawn takes opens up the rook file on his king. So this is a really nice game because both sides are exploiting this. If you take my piece, I'll open up my file on your king. So he steps aside, and now he loses his knight, and with that he loses his initiative. Takes the bishop, and here it says knight at g6 was a nice idea for white here. I haven't actually seen this before, so let's actually just insert this move. Knight at g6. So what's the idea of this? It hits the rook, and obviously if I take it, it's again the same problem. If I take it, I'm opening up this rook file on my king. So I step to one side, but now this is very beautiful. He wants a diagonal piece to drop on h7 to take, so then I can go knight takes rook with check. So then he takes the bishop. So if I'd say drop on h7 or something, well, this is just okay. So actually, the e7 square is well guarded, so that's not a problem. But the problem is knight at h6. So I hadn't seen this at all. Takes. I'm not seeing this. Knight to e7. Oh my goodness, it's a discovered check. So king h8 is forced. You have to move the king. Bishop g7 is checkmate. So how beautiful is that? So it's another opening up a line idea. Knight at h3. Checkmate. So yeah, doing something very natural like pawn at h7 is no good because white can threaten to open up this line. So this game is really beautiful, I think. So h6 though instead was played by mastertan. Takes, and then he took the bishop, threatening a bishop on g7. Okay, so rook g8 to try and defend. Knight at g6. Takes. Rook takes pawn. Yeah, actually I wanted to discuss something a little bit earlier, which is actually even back here, after pawn takes, he took the bishop, threatening bishop at g7, but actually he had mate directly with rook takes h6. So mastertan actually had a mate with this move. So the queen and the rook obviously are mating the king unless you take it or block it. You can't block it because the rook will just take on h7. So you have to take it. Okay, but now the point is pawn at g7. If you take that pawn, you're losing the queen with check. I mean, there is some crazy mate with knight at e6, but you can do a much more obvious. So I'll just show you the crazy mate first. Knight at e6, if you take it, queen here and queen here, checkmate. And if you don't take it, then knight here, queen here is checkmate. So there is a very beautiful short mate, but there's also a completely natural longer mate, which is queen here, pushing out the king, and then knight here, stopping the king from running back, and when the king goes here, queen here, checkmate. And if the king runs this way, then using a knight to finish off the checkmate. These two knights cover this rhombus of squares. So you can't take with the queen, but if you just sidestep, then white can promote now with a discover check, so he has to take with the king. And now rook at g8, forcing the king to come up. And now knight at d5, covering these two squares, so the king's now only got these two squares to go to. And now we have another knight. Okay, so this is going to take a while, so I'll just... The other knight, if you try and dodge it, then the queen is going to come in. If you take it, we're winning the queen with check, and we could drop a queen immediately, but then the king starts trying to escape. So the really neat thing to do is to block off the king's escape route and then drop the queen in, and it's checkmate. So that was a really nice mating idea. With rook takes h6, it gets a pawn for g7. Mastertan went for something slightly slower, taking the bishop, and then he took the pawn, and it was a little bit more complicated. Rook takes pawn, the rook is pinned, so the king has to sidestep. Check is blocked, takes, and by taking back, he's now no longer defending the rook with his queen. So rook takes rook check, king goes into the corner. If king goes here, then he's losing the queen with check. Yeah, so that's all over. King would go here, and queen here is checkmate. So he went into the corner instead, but now rook at h7 is checkmate. So that was a nice game from Mastertan to take a 2-1 lead in the match. Okay, let's look now at game 4. Is that right? No, it's not right. Yeah, game 4. Littleplotkin is white, plays e4. And we have this sort of knight f6 type setup. Castles, knight to b6, line. d4, bishops, goes back to d3. Yeah, and this move at f5, black only has one pawn, white only has one pawn. Ideally, white's dream is to put that pawn on h6, start attacking the castle's king. And similarly, black's dream is to put the pawn on h3 and start attacking the white king. So pawn at f5, it's a little bit of a shame because that pawn is a wonderful attacking piece and it's having to be used defensively. And also it's just even further blocking in that light squared bishop. So it does protect h7, but it's a real shame to lose that attacking piece. And even straight away, Littleplotkin is actually threatening just to pick up that pawn because of the pin on the king. So Mastertan blocks the pin, and Littleplotkin starts his attack. Now, of course, this is the benefit of having that pawn. Bishop takes h7 is not on the cards anymore. Oops. So just to recap. So it did have a purpose. Takes d5. So I guess the point of this is there's going to be some kind of yeah, what is d5? It's an interesting move. Okay, so d5. So apparently the best move for black here is at e4, because white is trying to open up the position, and this move at e4, well, it makes use of the pawn at f5 to really build a strong center. It will pick up a piece in the center, and it just really blocks up this. The king is stuck in the center, and it really tries to keep that king safe. So white is still slightly better, but it does try and help keep things safe. So knight b4. So let's see. Why, and also, why couldn't we just take this pawn, say? And yeah, the reason we can't take it is we can go pawn at f6, and there's a pin on the bishop, and it's hitting the rook. So it's a fork on bishop and rook. So that's quite a nasty move. So we're taking this bit. Well, we're winning a piece, and then What next? Who knows? Well, let's just have a look. Here takes, maybe knight takes, and then bishop at g5 just to keep your own king slightly safe, and pawn at e4. So this would have been the kind of ideas in mind. Yeah, so it's not clear what White's plan should be here. One idea is to pick up a knight and drop a knight here and begin some kind of attack on the black king in that way. But actually this pawn at e4 is really quite an annoying move. So it's quite a good defensive idea. Hi there, no friction. We're looking at this candidates match between littleplotkin and mastertan, which took place a few weeks ago but wasn't live streamed. And so just going through some of the games and analysing them. So knight b5 was played, and littleplotkin gets what he wants. He gets an attack on the king, and there's no question about it. That gets taken, and he's trying to get in, even though the rook is defending f7. He attacks that rook. Knight takes bishop. Pawn takes knight. Okay, so mastertan realizes he's in some trouble and goes on a counterattack. Rook takes g2. King takes g2, and pawn at h3. So if you took the pawn on h3, you're probably asking for trouble, because then another pawn is going to land on g4, and then that's going to take the knight, potentially with check, or maybe bishop here first. No, yeah, but trouble will ensue for sure. If you take that pawn at g4, if you step back, you're going to be in trouble. If you don't step back, you're going to get a bishop drop on h4, and black's pieces are going to be coming in. But littleplotkin did a smart thing, just steps back, and black doesn't quite have enough. So this check, he just simply blocks. Bishop takes g5, and now bishop f7 is a really nice move that littleplotkin found. Just recognizing this f7 square is weak, I have a knight coming in, and actually this is mating. I mean, so apparently another thing that mastertan might have done would have been king e7, but then you simply take this rook. Now this bishop is like inside black's camp, so it just has to be taken. But then there's quite a subtle move, rook at f7, and the idea is in order to bring the knight in, and this, it turns out, will be mating for white. And we'll see the lines similar to what actually happened in the game after king takes bishop. So knight comes in, and rook to f7 check. King takes the knight. d4. If the king wants to go back, then it's getting mated, because you can just drop a pawn here, king here, and a knight here will be checkmate. So you went forwards, but then pawn here is checkmate. Queen covering the light squares. So maybe slightly more resistant would have been king to e8 in this position. But then you have rook here, and the point is, if the rook ever takes the queen with check, so the king can't, if the king ever steps into the d file, the rook will take the queen with check. So the king has to step up to avoid that. But then there is this. Okay, the king is basically being pushed off out into the open. And either way, he takes one of these two pieces, we then go d4 check. If he doesn't take it, if he steps back, we can knight, knight, and this is checkmate. If he does take it, we can do a nice thing like knight takes b3 and then take the queen. And we have another queen in hand, so it's very easy to finish off. Okay, so we saw the mate that actually happened in the game, which was rook at f7 push and this. the mate could have been slightly delayed by playing queen takes pawn, but then you have the very nice move knight at f3, as we saw in the other variation. We're winning the queen with check, and it will be checkmate with the queen in hand. Okay, so a nice win by littleplotkin, and that tied up the match at 2 games all, with 6 games to go. So game 5. And in this game, littleplotkin is black. We have an e4, e5 with d4. So the good, probably the best move in the opening after bishop e7 is d4. So mastertan plays that, but then plays the very strange knight d5. So obviously knight takes d4 is the right move here. But knight d5, the problem with this is it hangs the e-pawn. So knight takes e4. So black already has an opening advantage. And then he defends the knight with the pawn he's just captured. Takes, hits the queen. So something he might not have realized is mastertan has got no pieces in hand. So there's a very nice move here, which is just simply queen to b4. If he defends with the pawn, then there's knight at c2 check, queen takes knight, queen takes bishop, and then the queen stops the king from castling. So that's pretty nice. If you defend with the bishop, if you defend the check with the bishop, there's queen takes b2 hitting the rook, so he castles, and then there's just at e6. So yeah, black's picked up is it a couple of extra pawns? Yeah, a couple of extra pawns. So a nice opening advantage from black. But he did f6 instead, which is okay, but it does create a slight weakness on f7. It makes it difficult for him to castle now. He's going to have to use a pawn at some point to block off this diagonal. But nope, he's not going to go for that. He's just going straight for an attack. So quite smart play, I think, from mastertan so far, just plugging away. Just trying to, black has a lot of pawns, so quite sort of making sure that these pawns don't advance into his position. But there's only so long he can hold on for. If bishop takes c6, okay, knight. Okay, queen to d1. So yeah, at this point there was an alternative, which is to actually give up the queen for 2 pieces. And if black goes knight f2 with the not very subtle threat of queen h1 mate, just takes. Yeah, so this kind of variation. So black is still doing nicely, but yeah. But what happened in the game, queen d1, I think was slightly worse for white. And here, actually, knight e5, knight takes pawn, so he's managed to dislocate this knight from the protection of the d4 pawn. But the threat is now on this knight, on c4. So probably the best move here is for black to actually recognize that knight is lost anyway, so go desperado and then take this bishop. But littleplotkin didn't notice that and took the bishop immediately, so just a very slight improvement. Bishop takes f2, takes, king goes in the corner. He's still doing very nicely in this position. He's winning a queen. No, he's not winning a queen, he's exchanging queens. But he's exchanging queens and getting a queen on the board. And here, yeah, very nice move, putting a bishop on this diagonal, hitting g2. It's a very difficult position for white to defend, and it's also true that white didn't really defend it, although black did miss here, just a very nice mate. Queen here, using the fact that the diagonal is the bishop is pinning that pawn, and then queen takes g2 checkmate. And if white were to block with something, we can still go queen takes g2 checkmate. Yeah. So yeah. So what actually happened was bishop takes g2 and then a pawn, and then he put the queen on h1, just trapping the king out in the open, out on the third rank, and then using the other bishop. The point is that if you take with the rook, then bishop at g4 and then queen takes pawn will be mating, so he went like this. Well, white's just got too much, and littleplotkin found the mate. So with that game, he took a 3-2 lead. So let's load up game 6. So we're past the halfway stage of the match. And what happened here? We had a Scandinavian. Check. Now in some of the earlier matches we've seen, if you go bishop e2, black can go queen to g6. And the reason that's slightly nasty is because it hits the g2 pawn. And you don't really want to drop a pawn on g3 defending that pawn. You don't really want to move your bishop back to f1 defending it. Maybe bishop to f3 is possible, but there are problems with that as well. So just to show that line. Bishop here, queen here, just open up the opening explorer. I imagine bishop f3 is the move. Bishop f3 is the most common move, but as you can see, black has quite a good record in this line with moves like pawn at d4, pawn at e5, not so often played. Knight f6. Yeah, well, there are various pawn at d4, knight. I'm guessing pawn at d4 is probably the best. Knight to e4 and knight f6. So black is doing okay. I mean, although Stockfish says +1, if we see in the opening explorer, black is doing okay in these positions. Maybe even here there are better moves. So an interesting line, by the way, is actually knight f3, and you allow this pawn to be captured. And this is actually quite interesting stuff. Rook g1 is the best move, and probably the critical move here for white is not to, although people have had a great success, like 40% taking that rook, the critical move, that's only because, yeah, the critical move I think is queen h3. Is it queen h3? Well, it seems like queen h3 and queen takes g1 are quite even. So this is actually quite an interesting way that can be, and Stockfish says +2, and so people have played this way with going knight to f3, but it's quite a critical line. Queen takes pawn, rook here, and black has got two choices, queen h3 or queen takes g1. The point being of queen takes g1, although you're giving up your queen, you're completely disrupting the king, and a rook will be landing on h1, and yeah. But okay, queen e2 I think is slightly more solid from white. And in this sort of situation, both sides want the other side to take their queen, because if you take my queen, I can develop my bishop. If I take your queen, you can develop your bishop. So the point of this kind of opening is you want to provoke the opponent to take your queen. So what's the idea of this move? It's apparently good. And I guess it's simply just to take that pawn. So the bishop was defending d4, so white is provoked to take the queen, and black gets the edge in development. Okay. Now here, black had a very interesting move. It's not winning or anything, but after castle's queenside at a3, just going straight in for an attack. Okay, there's no bishop defending that pawn, but I think the idea is just if you were to take that pawn, queen at a1, and if white were to defend with the queen, you've got queen takes knight. And if black were to defend with the knight, we've got bishop takes a2, which is slightly awkward. Does that really work? Yeah, bishop takes a2, and d7 is protected, so you don't need to worry about your own king side. Yeah, so the white king is kind of a little bit open. King d2 is actually okay. So this is actually all completely playable. It says kind of fairly even. Maybe queen takes c3 is quite nasty with king takes and knight at d5. So, but it's certainly interesting. But probably more natural would be for white to go queen at a4 check, just pushing that knight back and then taking the pawns. So it's a nice little trick. You go pawn at a3 thinking you're so smart, but there's queen here check and then taking the pawn. But white has got what he wants. His king is safe and he has a rook file. But black also has achieved something. What has black achieved? Queen at a1, rook here check, queen takes rook, knight takes. Yeah, I'm not sure what. Why couldn't, on consideration, why couldn't black have done queen at a1 immediately? And I guess the reason is because then queen at b1 would have followed. So yes, what black has achieved by playing pawn at a3 is something very subtle. And it's that he has forced or encouraged white to place his queen on the board. And a queen in hand is worth just slightly more than a queen on the board, because there's a flexibility of where to put it. So this would be a kind of line that could result. It's actually fairly uncertain who's winning. Okay, but instead, rook d8, very natural looking move. You're just putting extra defense on d7, which is a weak square potentially in black's position. Bishop takes c7, queen f5 with not very subtle threat, queen takes c2 mate, but also eyeing f2 and indeed taking f2. But the problem is white's pressure is too great in this position. In this position, you just did knight f3, just developing, and bishop d5, checking on the back rank, checks, lots of pressure on c7, and eventually breaking through with a now very nice mating sequence from littleplotkin. Pawn here, queen takes bishop, takes, knight here, smothered mate. Although just to say briefly, there was also a nice mating idea in this position, just with queen at b8, going straight for an attack. So blocking is pretty much forced. Or you get, if you step up, you get mated. But now you have pawn here. If king goes to e8, rook at d8 is checkmate, so you try and step up. If the king tries to run, what do you do? Well, there are all sorts of options. You could take the bishop and then go this check. I think quite a nice option, I think, is to take the bishop and then go this check. And the point is that if the king goes to either of these dark squares, you have bishop at b3. Bishop at g3, sorry. Picking up the queen, and although black can pick up, black has got no direct attack, not enough pieces in hand, and sure, black could pick up the white queen, but now white's got a queen in hand. Actually, black can't even pick up the white queen in that particular scenario. So if we were to step forwards, and bishop here, queen takes bishop, pawn takes, and then pick up the queen, yep, it's just mate straight away. So queen at f4 is checkmate. But if this were to happen, then queen is coming out, and this is not going to last long. Knight takes e4. Well, let's just, or knight e4 check. Queen takes knight. Queen here is checkmate. So this is sort of one fairly nice idea. So it's not directly mating, but it's almost a mate will come eventually through picking up the queen. If the king comes out the other way, there's actually a direct mate with pawn at d5. You can take it, but then pawn here, you can take that, but bishop takes knight check, knight here. Rook takes this knight, and well, we don't even need that knight in hand. And there are lots of other variations, but if the king like runs directly, then still there's knight takes knight check. The queen can come out. And there are lots of variations which I've put in the study, but it's also mating. Hi there, little plotkin. We're having a look at your games. And we're up to the point where you were 4-2 up. So this is a mastertan comeback coming up. So game 7. So game 7, little plotkin is black, and it's a d4, d5, the first of the match. Of g3. Okay, so it's hitting the queen, it's hitting f7, but f7 is covered by the bishop, so it's the queen that's the problem. Queen comes out to f5, bishop g2, and e6. Castles. Yeah, and in this position, the white king's already castled, but black plays bishop to b4, and this later turns out to be a little bit of a mistake, because queen d3, and we'll see the queen was eyeing coming to this square. And probably the best thing in this situation is to exchange off queens and safely castle. But what happened here, little plotkin goes for a bit of an attack, takes, and unfortunately this queen comes in and is threatening this bishop. Black doesn't have a way of both blocking the check and defending the bishop. Takes the bishop with check, blocks, now it's attacking the rook. So he's got a lot of material in hand, and he's forced to block us on, so there's no time for like a pawn at g2 or something in response. Bishop takes c5, pawn takes, bishop at d4. So trying to hit both bishop and knight, and maybe with some attacking ideas, if the rook can be moved. Queen takes c7. So in this position, actually, mastertan had maybe a slightly cleaner attack with pawn at d7. Because if you take, knight takes, king here, and a very nice idea, queen at a8. If you dare take that queen, this is checkmate. So pawn at d7 is a really annoying move. If you move the rook again, then you can go queen takes c7, hitting the rook. So that would have been real tough to deal with. But queen takes c7 first was also strong. Bishop takes c3, and now bishop comes in, takes back, knight g4, knight takes knight, queen takes. And just a nice move here, forking the king and the queen. If you take it, then another knight drops on h6, forking the king and the queen. Takes, knight to h6, king g7. He takes the queen. So h6. The problem is a pawn or a bishop landing on h6 and queen g7 will be checkmate. So little plotkin defends with h6, but mastertan here finds a really nice move to mate anyway. So what is it? Well, you can all see bishop takes h6 anyway apparently works. But the key idea is actually, even in that line, is bishop f8. Bishop f8, so you can take it, takes, but then bishop takes h6. So you can't control, black is unable to control both h6 and f8. So basically that rook in h8 was overburdened. Couldn't control both squares, and checkmate followed. So after 7 games, it was 4 games to 3 to little plotkin. Now looking at game 8, it was e4, e5 with h3. Now, just to say, in this position, it's more normal for white to play knight c3 or knight g5, with sometimes even some crazy sack ideas on h7. But knight g5 is hitting f7 in particular. But okay, h3 is all right, but it's slightly slower. And actually the problem with it is, okay, and the advantage, it does stop any bishop to g4, but of course the bishop is not coming to g4 anytime soon. The d pawn hasn't even been pushed. But okay, so it maybe gives up a little bit of white's advantage, but it's certainly interesting. So h6 takes, and so we're going straight in for an attack using the fact this pawn is pinned. The bishop can't even come to defense because the d pawn hasn't been pushed yet. So it's going straight in for an attack, but I think mastertan played this quite well. So rook g7. Okay, so the rook is staring down at the king, and the problem is white's got no pieces in hand to block the g file. So he just moves the king out of the way. Or he could have taken the bishop as well. So taking the bishop was a perfectly decent thing to do. But steps out of the way, and so both sides have really got development problems. So like the knight hasn't developed yet, this bishop hasn't developed yet. Both sides have gone for a very early attack on each other. And actually here, black had a very nice idea, but it's maybe quite hard to see. It's or see the intricacies of it. Bishop takes h3. The idea is, after g takes h3, even bishop takes f2 is possible, because if rook takes, a pawn is landing on g3 with check and winning the rook. White certainly does have pawn takes knight with check, but there's a quite nice return move d5, bringing the bishop into the attack. So it's all about developing your pieces as quickly as possible. Bishop at g2, you win the bishop. So something like this sort of line, just trying to free up, try and make the king a bit safer. And this, maybe black would have been had a slight advantage in this position after g takes h3. And if you go straight ahead and take the knight with check, d5, and this is an even sort of more, maybe this is slightly worse for black, because you've got pawn at g2, takes, tries to block up the file, but there's a very nice idea here with pawn at e2, and the point is, if the queen takes it, and if the queen doesn't take it, you suddenly have back rank problems. But if the queen does take it, okay, we just bishop takes g4, just that's pinning the knight to the queen, and if you take back the bishop, you're getting mated, because okay, so you're not getting mated immediately, or are you? I thought you were getting mated, because the idea is that knights are coming into f4, rook is coming in on g2, and it's a rather precarious looking situation. And h3 meanwhile is undefended, and your queen is also potentially coming in at some point. Rook at h4 is what it recommends, and why can't we just take it? Because then the queen can take back. So if knight takes rook, queen takes knight, you could block, but yeah, it's all rather complicated, but then a knight can come in with check and take the queen, and okay, so it's all rather complicated, but queen takes knight, pawn, so maybe this is rather inhuman, this whole line, but king takes h3, knight to f4 check, king h2, bishop at g1 check, just trying to put the king on a square where he can take. But if the problem is if you go back to h1, trying to avoid g1 and g3 where you're winning the queen with check, it doesn't work. You're still losing the queen with check, or actually you're getting mated directly. King h2 and g1 equals queen. So if you don't lose the queen with check. Okay, so there were some rather complex, I mean maybe rook at h4 is a little bit hard to see, but there are easier lines like knight knight f4, hitting the queen, queen goes to f1, and just dropping a pawn on g2. That's a much sort of simpler kind of line, and it's very, very strong for black. So probably actually after bishop takes h3, taking the bishop is the best move. But, sorry, is that right? After bishop takes h3, yeah, probably taking the bishop is the best. Black only has a pawn in hand. Yes, yeah, this sort of line. And yeah, black is winning, but it's a bit complicated. But okay, instead, mastertan went for pawn at g4 instead of directly bishop takes h3. And to be honest, this looks very strong. Maybe at higher depth it might even be stronger, so who knows. Takes back. Bishop at b3. Okay, so doubling up the bishops on this diagonal in the direction of the king. Takes, king h8, king tries to get out of the way. The black king is surprisingly safe. And same cannot be said of the white king, and yeah, in this position it's mate into, very nice mate, rook at h1, and in fact knight takes f6 already at this point, white resigned, but knight takes rook would have followed, king here, rook here, and if the king were to take the rook, queen at h2 is checkmate. Okay, so with that game, the match was tied at 4 games all, so mastertan had come back from 2-4 down, and we then go into game 9. Okay, game 9, littleplotkin is black, and we have e4, d4 from mastertan. So we have queen and bishop doubling up, targeting h7, but also hitting on d5. But both can be defended by a knight on f6. Moving the knight to f6 is not so good. Why not? Seems perfectly reasonable. In fact, is what happened in the game. Is the queen trade bad for black? Not obviously. So I'm not sure. Bishop takes knight. Yeah, so it just seems perfectly reasonable. Just I was surprised in the top 5 moves it wasn't coming up as simply going knight to f6. Okay, so knight at f6 is certainly another possibility. Knight to f6 is fine. At h6, not quite sure. So at h6, yeah, so I think at this point black is under attack and doesn't want the queen trade. But there's a very nice way of avoiding the queen trade, which is, or not having a problem with the queen trade, which is rook e8. So if then white takes the queen, you can take back with the knight. But if pawn takes pawn, threatening a mate on h8, you're then taking this bishop with check. I'm still a little bit nervous as black here. So, but apparently black can just about hold it with knight at g6. But yeah, the queen trade is just, yeah. So Stockfish says it's level, but it's certainly a little bit risky, this whole variation. Rook e8, h takes g7, yeah. so white doesn't have to trade queens immediately. He could go straight for h takes g7 before trading queens. So it's unclear which is better. So maybe that would be one reason why knight at f6 might be slightly preferable. Queen trade is something to avoid, but queen e8 doesn't solve black's problems. And here, in fact, black has a really nice move, which mastertan didn't actually play, which is bishop to h6. And the idea is, if you take the bishop, there's pawn at g5. And you have to go to h5. And if you go to h5, there's g takes f6, and that king is not returning for a long time back to its king side. The king is right out in the open, and it's staying out in the open. The bishop's controlling that diagonal. The pawn is controlling g7. This is just lost for black. But the problem is, if the king does the obvious thing and steps back to g7, there's g takes f6, check, and if the king steps back, a knight check and a pawn on g7 is checkmate. So you have to take that pawn. But if you take that pawn knight to h5, again, if the king has nowhere to go apart from somewhere along the d file. But if you go to d6 or d5, the queen can come in to to e6 or e5, the queen can come in and queen d5. And the moment you step back to e7, the pawn goes to f6 with checkmate. So that's why this bishop can't be taken. But if you just step back, then pawn at g7, and that rook is trapped. So you try and defend your position, takes, you're losing a queen, you're losing... In this kind of position, queen takes knight is even possible. If you take the knight back, knight at h6, takes, and now you have a mate threat, rook at h8. You have no counter threats against the white king. Knight at g6 is the only way of defending the mate threat, but now you simply have bishop at f6, threatening rook at g7 maybe. No, threatening... Sorry, threatening... Yeah, what are you threatening? Maybe pawn at g7 and rook at h8, certainly. Stuff like this. If black does nothing, what's the exact threat? Oh, knight h6 is mate. Okay, that's what the threat is. Okay. Yeah, I should have seen that. Knight h6 is a mate threat. So if black drops on g7 to block it, you do knight at g6 anyway. Okay, so this is check. If I take the knight, then there's a very nice mate. Rook at h8, knight takes rook forced, bishop takes h7, checkmate. Wow. But if I step into the corner, then I have a smothered mate. So, yeah. So a whole nice sequence, all beginning with the crazy move, bishop moving to h6. Crazy sacrifice of that bishop. But instead, mastertan went pawn at h6. So it's also good, but it's not quite as strong. And pawn at g7, again, is sort of trapping the rook idea. Now black has knight takes e4, takes queen, takes back with the king. Notice that if you take back with the queen, you're getting mated. Because of rook at g7, if you take with the queen, takes back, you're going to have to take this, but white's got just too many pieces to mate you. If queen takes rook, pawn takes, king takes pawn, or knight g6 is necessary. Knight g6 probably doesn't work because White could land us on e8. Okay. Or apparently just queen takes e4. So if you just step to one side, unfortunately still queen takes e4. You can sacrifice the rook, use the knight to get the king back onto a dark square, and fork king and queen. And it's checkmate. Okay, so that's why littleplotkin took with the king, which is the correct thing to do. Rook at h8, bishop block, bishop e2, knight attacks the rook, takes, queen takes knight. Okay, so knight at g6 maybe wasn't the best defense. So knight at f6, defending was maybe slightly stronger. Knight at g6, and mastertan found a nice sacrifice of his queen. The idea being rook takes bishop. If you take the rook, then there's knight here check, bishop here check, and knight takes queen, and black's king is out in the open, and white's got all the material. So after this move, instead of taking the rook, he ran with the king because he doesn't want to lose his queen. But now bishop at d3, queen e6. So it's the minor pieces are just swarming all around black's position, and it does not look as if black will last long. But black kept on holding out, and in this position found mate. Bishop at f3, knight at g2. Oh, sorry, at this point he resigns. Rook takes g7. Ha! Yeah, so the really nice move found by mastertan was bishop at f6. King e8 was played. The point is that if king takes bishop, then knight at d5 is checkmate, because the retreat squares for the king are blocked off. These two squares are blocked by the knights, and these two squares are blocked by this. So you can't take this bishop. So bishop at f6 is a really nice move. He steps back, and knight to g7, another very nice move. Rook takes g7 is forced because if you go to king f8, knight to h7 is checkmate. So you have to take it. And now a really nice mate found by mastertan, queen at f8. So we've had a really nice sort of combination of moves here from mastertan to finish this one off. King takes queen is forced, and the threat is pawn takes rook, and he has the back rank covered. But queen at f8, and littleplotkin resigned. So with that game, mastertan bounced back from 2-4 down to take, I believe, a 5-4 lead. And so game 10, littleplotkin trying to win this game to at least get a draw from this match. So obviously you want to connect your queen and your rook because you don't want your king taking back your queen. Okay, pawn takes, interesting choice. And this position, yeah, queen takes is fine because after an exchange of queens, the checking squares with knights are both occupied. So instead, mastertan is going for a check on f3, bishop e2, so queen at d7, d4 check. Okay. So mastertan sacrificing to begin an attack. This is weird why this is here. Not quite sure why that. Okay, I can't control that, but okay. Okay, so black starting a little bit of an attack, but doesn't have that much material in hand. White's got a lot of material in hand, so it's a little bit dangerous. King b1. Okay, bishop takes c3. But this is a little bit dangerous. If b takes c3, probably b takes c3 is fine, but there's knight at a3 to follow, king b2, and queen takes bishop. So this check is also picking up this bishop at any point in the future. But he's containing his attack for now. Bishop takes f7. Knight takes. Queen at e6 check. He blocks. Queen takes d7 would obviously lead to mate because white's got knights in hand. Oh, actually, would it? So it's not so clear. You'd have to use pawns, maybe pawn at e6 at the end of it. So if queen takes, king takes, pawn at e6, and if the king doesn't take the pawn, then there's it's going to get mated. If it does take the pawn, a knight could drop on. Yeah, I'm not seeing. It says knight at c5, but bishop could take c5, so this is quite hard to see. I'm not entirely convinced. King could take f5, queen at e4 would be mate. Yeah, this is not. Maybe a move like bishop c4 would be more natural. But anyway, the point is white has enough to get the king out into the open, and this is clearly risky for black. So king to d8 obviously is sensible. And here littleplotkin actually made a mistake. He played queen takes knight, queen takes f7. But it's a very subtle mating idea that mastertan has here. And remember, mastertan is 5-4 up in the match, so this was a game and match moment for mastertan. It's very hard to see how he's got anything. The queen can't come directly in. Knight h3 doesn't really work directly. Can't come in. If you take, so what? But the winning move is promote. And the idea is we're going to go bishop takes pawn, knight at d2 check, king here, and bishop takes g2 checkmate. But surely white could just stop that by taking back with the rook. Well, no, because you could take that rook. You still got. Yes, so then knight at e2 then doesn't work any longer. But now we have knight at h3 check. And again, if you don't take that knight, king to f1, pawn d2 is checkmate. So you have to take that knight. But now you can use that rook you just captured to push the king over to c1, and pawn at d2 is checkmate. So yeah, knight at a3 is a critical idea. If black does not find that move, it's plus 30 for white. If black doesn't find this move of promoting, it's plus 22 for white. And yeah, mastertan did not find this idea, instead taking this pawn on d7, and littleplotkin's very nice move. The bishop can't take the queen because it's pinned. Blocks, just picks up a lot of material, gets rid of the attack, and just takes even more material and finds a nice checkmate. So with that win, he took a 5-all in the match, and yeah, that was on his way to securing 5th place out of the 11 candidates. So if there are any other matches which we haven't covered, which are not already streamed, we hope forward to looking at them in the coming weeks. But this is the table as it stands, with only 2 matches outstanding. Blitzbullet against JK the Bullfrog, has not yet been played, but that can't affect the standings of either littleplotkin or mastertan, or actually it can. So blitzbullet can still overtake mastertan. And then the other match is mastertan against blitzbullet, of which only 7 games have been played. So there are 3 games to play in that match. But the big news, just to repeat, this Saturday, the 24th of November, 1800 GMT, is day 3 of the final between Opperwesen and Jan Lee. So do tune in to watch that. And thanks for watching this recap of the candidates match between mastertan and littleplotkin. Hope you've enjoyed. Thanks for watching.